こんにちは、Muditāの高橋圭です。芸術が人をつなげるをテーマに行っているオンラインゲストインタビュー企画。今回のインタビューは、ローリンズ大学のコーネル美術館でキュレーターやドーセントとして活躍するモーガン・スノープさんに2回にわたってお話を伺いました。西洋の芸術だけでなく、中東やアフリカの絵画や衣服、様々な形の芸術作品を専門にするモーガンさん。キュレーターやドーセントというのはどういった仕事なのか、その仕事を通して芸術作品を他者との架け橋として経験してきたモーガンさんの様々なエピソードにご注目ください。
Here we have guest today, Morgan Snoap. Thank you so much for being here for Mudita's interview. Would you mind to explain yourself a little bit? Give us some brief background where you're from.
Yeah, sure. My name is Morgan Snoap, as Rio said. I'm from Oviedo, Florida, which is 30 minutes away from Rollins College, where I went to, well, I'm still in school, I guess. I'm an art history major, and I had minors in Middle Eastern and North African studies and sexuality, women's, and gender studies. I've worked at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum, Rollins College's campus museum, for the past 4 years as both a docent or a tour guide and a curatorial intern or fellow. So I love art, I love talking about art, and I'm happy to be here with you all today.
We have some connection, right? The Rollins Choir. And
yes,
I remember you sung in alto section, if I remember.
Yes, I've been in alto 2 in Rollins Choir, so all 4 years as well.
How did you grow your passion with art history?
Oh man, well, when I was a little kid, I always loved art and arts and crafts, and I always grew up wanting to be an artist. And then at some point I stopped, wanting to make art and just wanted to start studying art. And so when I was in high school, I took an AP art history course, and that was just sort of my first interaction with art history as a study. And I spent the rest of high school saying, I can't study art history in college, I won't make any money. And then I got over that, and I decided to just follow my passion. So I came into Rollins as a decided art history major, and I haven't changed my major since.
That's great. No, so the term curator and docent are like a little unfamiliar to people in Japan. Can you briefly describe your experience as a curator and docent at Rollins?
Yeah, for sure. So a curator at a museum is the person who decides what work should be included in an exhibition, which is the display that goes on view at a museum. And so they get to sort of play around with what stories they want to tell with different artworks. And so it takes a lot of creativity as well as the background and knowledge of art history. And so I was able to be a curator for an exhibition that's on view at the museum right now. But I also got to work with CFAM's sort of chief curator, our main curator, as an intern. And then a docent is basically a tour guide. So it's somebody who gives people art tours. So I give tours both at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum as well as at the Alfond Inn, which is a hotel connected to the school that has our contemporary art collection.
So it's basically a designer of the museum. My baby child. Yeah, and the docent is a tour guide based at the museum. But both jobs require to have this strong background with art.
Yes,
right.
For sure.
But what was the most memorable collection or exhibition that you have ever worked on?
All right, well, that's got to be African apparel bedded transformations across the 20th century, which is the exhibition that I helped curate with Dr. Mackenzie Moon Ryan, who's a professor at Rollins, along with Christina Toppin, who's a current junior. And so we got to work with a private collector who's sort of locally based in Florida, Central Florida, and she has a really large collection of African textiles or clothing. So this exhibition, instead of displaying paintings or sculptures on the wall, is actually all clothing that was worn across the continent of Africa. So we have works from North Africa, West, East, Central, and Southern Africa, as well as jewelry that's on display. So that was a sort of fully collaborative process where Dr. Ryan, Christina, and I all discussed how we wanted to sort of conceptualize the exhibition. We went through the collection and got to handle, or actually literally physically touch, all of these artworks, and then we got to decide how to display them in the museum. And we even wrote a catalog, so a book that goes along with the exhibit. So that's been my favorite project.
Wow.
It's got my name on it.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's huge. Wow. So how did you decide like which one you picked? Which one like you?
It was it was really hard. We wanted to make sure that we gave as sort of comprehensive or full a view of the continent of Africa as possible. So we wanted to make sure we included works that were from all different regions of the continent. So I think we have over 20 of the 54 countries in Africa represented. So that was really important to us, that we got to show people, the biggest picture of Africa possible. We don't want to think of the whole continent as, one place. We want to think about all the diversity of cultures and people and countries. And so that was huge for us, as well as including things that were maybe a little bit recognizable. So there are some textiles in the exhibition and some clothing items that people might recognize because they've been adopted by the African American communities in the States, or perhaps people just recognize it from knowing something about African clothing. And also works that are a little bit more surprising. So you look at it and think, oh, that's African? I didn't know, or that looks a little more like more American or more Western.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and so it's kind of a new study of clothing as an art form, like especially African textiles have only been studied since the 1970s, and so people are just now starting to think about clothing as an art form. And I have the catalog right here that you can include or not. I just wanted to show it to you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But this is our book here. This is probably flipped for you, but I'll pull up. We have those the Maasai collar that I can show you since you're kind of familiar. So here's our Maasai collar here. And so we all, Christina and I, who is the other student, we all wrote these entries for the catalog. So we got to do all the research and all the writing. Works like this is a Tunisian silk vest, women's vest for marriage ceremonies. And so that doesn't look African to people, but it's something that's still found in the continent of Africa. And still is telling a unique story about a woman's life in North Africa.
So this is kind of related to your study of obviously the art history and also Middle Eastern and North African studies. So what do you think are some of like big similarities in art and people from all over the world?
It's a big question.
I know. Sorry, this is quite broad.
It depends on the art you're talking about. So when we talk about clothing, it's quite different because we have people's religions really influence the clothing that they wear. So of course, we think about the Middle East, we think about women wearing veils, and of course that's part of a religious sort of requirement. And then also in painting and in sculpture and even in architecture, you can see the influence of religion. So I think religion is definitely something that whether it be Islam or Judaism or Christianity, is usually impacting art. But also just, simple things like the use of color. So there's certain colors that pop up more often in Islamic architecture. Like we see bright blues and we see really deep, rich sort of primary colors. It's also very different to see how people render the human form, so how artists are thinking and displaying how people look. And so depending on the type of art and depending on whether it's more historical or whether it's more modern, so modern and contemporary art, sometimes artists are using photography, so it's a direct image of the human body, or maybe they're sort of abstracting the human body because that's the way they're thinking about and deconstructing what the human form looks like. And again, in the Middle East, religious art, you can't depict human forms or animal forms because you'd be acting like God, and so you only secular art or art that is non-religious.
Right. Oh, okay. That I didn't know.
Yeah.
So can you give us some tips or some ways that we can communicate with artwork when we are actually at the museum? So when we go into the museum, and lots of people just kind of walk through and without understanding what is the beauty of this experience to face, artwork. So what are some of the tips and ways to do this?
All right. So I always think museum visits and how people interact with artworks is so personal. And so some tips that I might give might not work for everybody, but I still think it's important to think about that. So one thing that I'm guilty of is I always want to go and read the artwork label or read the text on the wall before I look at the work of art, and I would advise people not to do that. I think it's the most important thing is the work of art itself, what you're looking at, and so it's so important to spend some time just looking really closely and spending some good sort of face-to-face time with the artwork before you want to read the text, before you start to look around the gallery. So I think if you're attracted to a work of art, if you see a work of art when you walk into a room, go straight to it and just like stand in front of it and just look and get, close. Don't let the guards, tell you have to back up and, make sure you don't get too close to the work of art. But it's really good to just spend some time and look really closely and look at the textures, especially if it's a painting. I always love seeing the texture of the canvas because it could be very, very smooth because the artist has, worked really hard to create that texture. I think it's important to, if you're with somebody, to talk about what you're seeing. So I usually go to museums alone, or if I'm with my family, I'll try to talk with them about our works of art, because we're talking about how, art sort of connects us. One way that art can connect us is by us just talking about art. So if you're looking at a work of art, maybe think about it in your head, but then talk to the person next to you and talk to your friend or your family who's with you and see what they're seeing, how it's different. Everybody interprets works of art differently, and we can learn a lot from different people's perspectives and interpretations.
Basically, like when you're at the museum, like what's the joy to be surrounded by, all those artworks? What's the joy of the time that you can spend with, a piece of art?
Well, I always think about being in front of a work of art as sort of like a conversation. So you're with the work of art, which is an object, it's something that doesn't have life and movement of itself, but it's still this sort of living being that you're standing in front of and you're talking with. So when you're looking at a work of art, you're looking at the artist and what the artist's personal life was and what their personal history was, but also the time period that they were in and the place that they were in. And so it's this conversation on so many different levels. First, the artist who made it, and also that history that's involved there, and then the physical place it was created. And so I think there's so much joy and so much interest in education that we can have in just being with the work of art and getting to know all of those different layers of it. So whenever I think of like a really big moment for me in seeing a work of art in person was actually it's a self-portrait of an artist. Her name is Shireen Nishat, and she's an Iranian artist, so also a Middle Eastern artist. But I had studied her work in my high school class. And then when I got to Rollins and I went into the Cornell Fine Arts Museum, they actually had one of her works up in the museum. It was really like a wow moment for me to go from high school and then my first sort of week at college going to the museum. And then it was a self-portrait, and there are all these black and white photographs. And so when I was looking at that work of art, I was literally looking into the eyes of the artist who had made this work and whose work I had studied. Then actually, I think it was my sophomore year, I went and I actually wrote a really long research paper about a film that she had made. And so it was so special to have that sort of like intimate personal moment with an artist. Of course, she doesn't know me. I don't really know her, but I did get to be with her for that time. But then, of course, when it's a self-portrait, it has this whole other layer, because it literally is the artist themselves looking out at you in the work that they created, and in whatever time period they were in, whatever sort of thing that was going on in their life at that time is sort of frozen in that moment, in that self-portrait, which I think is really beautiful and really interesting. And I love that, especially self-portraits from, way back, centuries and centuries ago. That's something, a time period we can never access. It's something that we didn't live through. Maybe it's from a place that we've never been to before, but it's frozen there for us to look at and to engage with, even nowadays in the 21st century. With an artist who's long dead, we still get to have that moment with them.
Sure.